Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reviving Vet Med. In this episode, we are going to be discussing the important topic of self-care. Now, while very few of us dispute the importance of self-care, many people will say there just isn't enough time, especially in the summer. We're pulled in lots of different directions, whether it's work, childcare, vacation, if you get around to scheduling it, or other family functions and other activities with the weather being nicer. Now, it's wonderful to enjoy these activities that the summer has to offer, but the disruption in routine and the unusual busyness can cause self-care to become an afterthought. And we know as caregiving professionals that self-care is one of the most important things that we can do to preserve our well-being and to prevent burnout. So in honor of July 24th being International Self-Care Day, in today's episode, we are going to discuss the importance of self-care and how we can make sure that it still happens even when life gets busy. So I'm going to go through what my plan is for my summer staycation and just give you a bunch of other tangible tips and practical pointers along the way. I'm really excited to share this information with you today, so let's go ahead and start the episode. This is the Reviving Vet Med podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Marie Hollowaychuk. My mission is to improve the mental health and well-being of veterinary professionals around the world. So I don't think anyone will dispute the importance of self-care. I think that there has been a lot of information to come out in recent years, letting people know really what self-care is and what it isn't. And I think one of the things that I really just remind myself of over and over as a veterinary professional is that because I am in a caregiving role, it is even more important that I take care of myself in order to do the work of caring for others, whether it be my patients, my team members, my clients, whomever it might be. And so really the bottom line is that if we aren't taking care of ourselves, we can't take care for others. And I think all of you have probably experienced things in your life that have been similar to mine, whereby you weren't taking care of yourself and maybe you weren't getting enough sleep, or you hadn't taken vacation in a long time, or you weren't setting boundaries around your needs and limits. And what ends up happening in those situations is that we start to make mistakes, or we show up at work cranky and exhausted and not as our best selves. And this is really not good for anybody. It's not good for the people we're trying to help, and it's certainly not good for ourselves. And there is definitely evidence to suggest that amongst caregiving professionals, if they are not taking care of themselves, then they can certainly do harm. So that's exactly what we want to avoid. Now, I think in the summertime, when life gets busy, we really forget about the importance of self-care, or we get so lost in all of the activities and scheduled things that self-care becomes an afterthought. And I think it's important for us to recognize that when things are busy, when work is tough, when shifts are long, or when we're working extra shifts or overtime, that is when self-care becomes even more important. Self-care is not one of those things that you want to leave until you retire or take vacation or whatever it might be. You know, self-care is something that you want to incorporate all the time, but especially during times of busyness and overwhelm. And, you know, there's evidence to support this information. We know, again, based on work that's been done amongst caregiving professionals, especially amongst palliative care givers. So in the human palliative care field, where a lot of this research has been done, that work-life separation, that taking time away from work to engage in activities that are not work-related, that bring us joy, that allow us rest and restoration, that those are really necessary for preventing burnout. So we want to make sure that we are taking steps in order to plan that self-care into our life. Now, other than being busy, because of all the different things that are going on in the summertime, very often too, we, become attached to our work. We embrace this idea of workaholism. We become martyrs for our profession and for our teams. And we wear this busyness almost like a badge of honor. And that's definitely something that is in need of reprogramming, I think, on an organizational and professional basis, but also individually. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is like this. Certainly for me, I'm one of those people who was raised to think that idleness is laziness. And, if you're not working and hustling, then, you shouldn't be making money and those types of programming. And so it's important that we do the work to reprogram our thought process and to really remind us that time for ourselves is not selfish. It is necessary for the work that we need to do as veterinary care providers. Now, even if we aren't wearing busyness as a badge of honor, if we truly are feeling overwhelmed and overstretched and overcommitted, we do have the ability to change that. And the way that we change that is to say no to other people and to set boundaries. And I know for many of you who are listening, you're like, oh my goodness, not this again. This setting boundaries and saying no. It's a message certainly that I deliver pretty often and one that you've probably heard from others as well. But I say it here again because this really truly is what we need to do in order to take care of ourselves. And so, when it comes to boundaries are really this idea of honoring what we need and what our limits are. So these are different for everyone. So please don't look to other people to determine for you or to tell you what your boundaries should or should not be. Because I can honestly say, for me, my boundaries are different from some of my other colleagues and friends. And my boundaries have also changed over time, depending on what season of life that I'm in. They've certainly changed again recently, now that I have a 2-year-old at home and, so that I can make sure that I have time to spend with her. So, when it comes to boundaries, it really takes a little bit of awareness in terms of recognizing, what do I need? How many hours of sleep do I need? How many, breaks do I need in a day? How much time do I need to complete my medical records? Taking time to really sit with what your needs are. And if this is something that you've struggled with, you're not alone. We are not the type of individuals to just sit around and think about our needs. That's really not in our nature because we're always thinking of other people's needs. But I urge you to, at the very least, just notice when you start to feel resentful. Notice when you start to feel like you're being taken advantage of. Chances are that those indicators are saying to you that there is a boundary that is being crossed, that your needs aren't being met, and that you need to do something about it. And so it can be hard not just to recognize these situations, but even more so to do something about them. And I've, coached a lot of people throughout the years in terms of helping them with their boundaries. And thankfully, I do, have some strategies that I can share with you really to help you. And so it can be as simple as just telling someone, I won't see more than 2 appointments per hour, or I need 1 hour blocked off to complete my medical records, or setting boundaries around your availability. I turn my phone off at 10 and I'm unavailable until 8. These are things that years ago were just unheard of to us. We have to be available all the time and just at the whim of what our clients need. And we just can't sustain that anymore. That's not behavior that is conducive to a long and thriving career. So it really is important for us to nip those behaviors in the bud by setting those boundaries. So I actually created a PDF that I'm going to link to in the show notes that provides simple statements for setting boundaries. And it will give you just, some ideas of what I consider to be healthy boundaries and what might serve for you as conversation starters when it comes to setting boundaries with the people in your life. Now, the other thing I mentioned with regards to preserving time for self-care is this need to say no to other people. And, I think it was Steve Jobs who said, it's by saying no to others that I can preserve time in my life for what's really important. And I'm paraphrasing that. Those aren't his exact words, but, Steve Jobs was a person who was really readily able to delineate in his life what was most important, and everything else, it was a no. It was an easy no for him so that he could focus on what he really, truly needed to get done. Now, again, for us as caregivers in the veterinary profession, saying no is really hard for us. And I think there are a lot of people pleasers in our profession. And if I'm being totally honest, I'll say that I am a recovering people pleaser. It's a tendency that I've really tried to get away from because I know that it puts me in a place of resentment and frustration when I'm always putting others first before myself. And so I urge you to do just that. I urge you to think to yourself when you're saying yes to something, what else are you saying no to? Because inevitably saying yes to someone else means that you're saying no to something for yourself. So instead, could you think about saying no? Now, I had a recent experience with this just this weekend. It was really interesting. I had the offer to go out. It's stampede time here in Calgary at the time of this recording. And so, there's all sorts of events, animal related. There's a midway. There's lots of different foods and stuff to eat and lots of things going on in the city. And it's a really happy celebratory time. And it's also involves a lot of crowds and busyness, and it's very hot here right now. And a friend invited me to go to Stampede with our kids. And, I thought about it and I wanted to say yes initially, or I felt I should say yes initially. And ultimately I ended up saying no. I looked at what I had on the docket for the weekend, and it was already feeling like enough in terms of events scheduled for my daughter and I knew what I needed. I needed some time at home to meal prep and to look at my week and plan my week and have some quiet time for my daughter, before she goes back to daycare and all the things. So inevitably I ended up saying no, and it's not easy to say no. And I honor that for you as well. And it's taking me a lot of time to really almost plan ahead about different ways that I can say no to other people without feeling awkward or unkind or ungracious. And in that PDF that I mentioned to you before, I also include 10 statements for saying no. So phrasing it in ways that are, for example, I wish I could, but I'm not taking on anything else right now, or now is not a good time for me, or I don't have the time and energy to do that today. These are very nice ways to say no and to, still hold true to what you need. And so I will, again, provide a link in the show notes so that you can download that. So these are really the best pointers that I can give you in terms of carving out time for self-care, which again, as I said, is so important. I know, again, things that stop us from our self-care are the busyness, the not wanting to say no, the not being able to set boundaries, and really just not being able to carve out that separation between work and life that is such an important component in terms of our burnout prevention. Now, I know a lot of people really equate self-care with vacation. They think, when I take vacation this summer, that's when I'll practice my self-care. And I don't know about you, but, with everything going on in the world today, and I'm not just talking about the pandemic, but I'm talking about travel now, this is probably a time where it is the worst in terms of travel. So at the time of this recording, it is all over the news that people are having their flights canceled, they're getting delayed, their baggage is getting lost, and all sorts of different things. And I'm a pretty good traveler on my own. I've done a lot of traveling in my life for work and for pleasure. And I can honestly say with a lot of conviction that I am not missing travel right now when I hear these stories. I spoke to a friend just this past week who had gone on a veterinary CE vacation, and she went on a cruise. She brought her mom with her. Her and her mom were going to enjoy the cruise, and she was also going to take in some continuing education at the same time. And it sounded like a great idea. And ultimately the trip was wonderful. But what wasn't wonderful was the travel to and from the cruise. So on the way there, they lost her luggage. She couldn't get through customs. The flight that they were supposed to get on after they finally got their luggage was delayed. And it was just one nightmare after another. And even on the way back, it was the same thing. And what should have been, a 2 or 3 hour flight home ended up taking 36 hours. And so, it's stories like that that make me want to enjoy a summer staycation instead of a summer vacation. And I wrote about taking a summer staycation for self-care in a blog this month, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of this, you can have a wonderful staycation that is really, really nourishing for your self-care. So when I teach individuals about self-care, I usually talk about self-care in the context of the 8 dimensions of wellness. So the 8 dimensions of wellness are physical, social, emotional, spiritual, environmental, financial, intellectual, and occupational. So these are the dimensions of wellness when we think about taking a holistic look at our well-being that really allow us to take good care of ourselves. So it's not just, sleep enough hours and eat the healthy foods and the exercise. That's just one small component of our overall well-being. So I have a week off at the beginning of August coming up here, and I will be using that week to take a staycation. I've decided not to go anywhere, but to spend that time at home doing some things that are going to be really beneficial for my health and well-being in the context of self-care. So I plan, number 1, to get out in nature. So getting out in nature, experiencing the awe and wonder of natural beauty, whether it be the mountains, the ocean, forests, gardens, whatever it might be for you. There is so much research to demonstrate that any experience of awe and wonder, recognizing, that there are things in this world that we cannot explain, that are almost beyond words to describe, that is really beneficial for our spiritual well-being. And there's also research, it's kind of a double whammy, whereby spending time in nature actually has been shown to drop cortisol concentrations and resolve stress. So I will be planning a hike to the Rocky Mountains to enjoy some time in the mountainous nature at some point during my week of staycation. The other thing that I'm going to be doing is to book some health appointments. So, again, we often don't think of health appointments, with our doctor or psychologist or whomever as our self-care, but that is very much a component of self-care, taking care of ourselves. So I've got a couple of appointments that I need to catch up on. And if I can't book them during that week that I'm off, I'll at least make the appointments so that it's scheduled and it's on the calendar for when I can make those appointments. And again, for me, that is helpful for my physical self-care. And in the context of my social self-care, I'm going to be taking some time to nurture my social connections. So depending on who you speak to, actually, the experts would suggest that social self-care is probably one of the most important in terms of our mental health and well-being. And the reason for that, of course, is that we are social creatures. We as human beings are meant to be in a group. We are meant to be with people. And there is a lot of research to demonstrate that knowing that you've got a good social support system is helpful for your resilience and well-being. Because if you know that when things get tough, you've got people that you can turn to, you're much more likely to bounce back faster from that difficulty. So whether it is your birth family or your chosen family, whomever, make sure that you're taking time to nurture those connections. So I will be planning, some walks or phone connection time. Preferably, these are face-to-face connections, with video if you're calling people by distance. But, however you can stay in touch with people socially, you want to take advantage of that. So that's how I will be fostering my social self-care during my staycation. Now, when it comes to my environmental self-care, there's a lot of research to demonstrate the benefits of keeping a clutter-free and minimalist environment on our psychological well-being. And so the work of Marie Kondo, who wrote, of course, Spark Joy and The Magic Art of Tidying Up, she is, really onto something when it comes to, giving away things that don't bring us joy and minimizing the amount of stuff, that we have in our lives. And there's been a lot of research following up on this work to demonstrate just that. In fact, there's studies that demonstrate amongst women, those who feel that their house is cluttered, they are more likely to experience depression and, feel mentally unwell compared to those who feel that they live in a serene and clutter-free home environment. So there's lots and lots of studies out there. Those are just a couple of them. But the whole point is that what I plan to do during my week of staycation is to take time to, go through some of my closet clothing and to go through some of my daughter's toys and other things, and just to really look at what is it that we need? What is it that we don't need? What is it that's not bringing us joy anymore? What haven't we used, in the last year? And what can I comfortably give away knowing that I'm probably not going to need it or use it in the immediate future? So that will be definitely, that will take some time for me during my week of staycation to go through that and to find ways to donate or sell or distribute some of those items. Now, when it comes to financial self-care, this one is a pretty simple one. And again, not one that many of us think of in terms of self-care, but your finances have such a role on your mental health and well-being. And we're seeing this a lot in the veterinary literature recently, whereby there are studies to demonstrate that individuals, veterinarians specifically, with any amount of student debt have lower levels of well-being, and that those who work with a financial planner or a financial advisor of some kind have higher levels of well-being. So I have a financial advisor. I work closely with an accountant who also does my bookkeeping. And I am going to make a point, because we are, have just finished out the second quarter of the year, that I will be reconnecting with my accountant, and we will be going over my income and my expenses for the year thus far to really look at, what do I need to plan for financially for the rest of the year to meet my needs and my goals. That includes preparing for emergencies, preparing for tax payments, and so on and so forth. So getting my finances assessed is going to be not a joyful part of my week, but definitely an important part of my self-care. So then we have the emotional self-care dimension. And for me, what I've decided to do during my self-care staycation is to take a bit of a digital detox. So yes, technology is amazing for keeping in touch and for staying connected and for getting my work done and so on and so forth. But there is also a lot of detriment that comes from constantly being connected and constantly having a sense of needing to respond to others and keep in the know about what's going on in the world. So I will be disconnecting from technology. I'm going to be taking a step back from social media, from work technology, and even from messages with family and friends. Not to say that I won't, I'm going to completely cut myself off from others, but that I will be really, implementing boundaries when it comes to how often and how much time I'm spending on social media and on my phone. So that is one thing that I will be doing as well. And I can tell you this, in the past when I've taken time to go on yoga retreats or other vacations, I have really relished, having my phone in airplane mode or really limiting the ways that people can contact me while I'm away, really for the simple fact of wanting to disconnect. So I urge you to think about doing the same as well. Now, when it comes to my intellectual self-care, this is where we, have benefit with lifelong learning, with staying on top of news feeds and new information that's coming out, learning from books and documentaries and various other things. And one of my most enjoyed ways to learn is to listen to podcasts. So I'm a huge podcast listener. Anytime I'm walking the dog, sometimes even when I'm walking with my daughter, I should say, I will listen to a podcast. And my favorites are really related to mental health and well-being. I listen to The Happiness Lab is a really good one, Savvy Psychologist, and several other ones. Hidden Brain is another really good one. And Happier is another one of my favorites. So lots of favorite podcasts. And I think what I'm going to do this self-care staycation is that I'm going to download a podcast related to parenting. Bethany, my daughter, is 2. And for all of you parents out there, you know full well how difficult these 2s can be with their toddlerness. So I'm going to download some podcasts related to toddler parenting and behavior just to make sure that I am staying on track with how I'm managing her tantrums and other incidents. So looking forward to that. And last but not least, when it comes to our occupational self-care, I will be setting a boundary with work. So anything that relates to work-related well-being, whether it's taking breaks, setting boundaries, revising your schedule, or maybe learning something new that relates to your work. These are all ways to engage in occupational self-care. I am going to particularly focus on a work-related boundary. So I'm going to make sure that I have my auto reply set on my emails and that I'm not going to be available for any requests that are not emergent or very urgent, so that I can really take a step back and enjoy some time away from work. For all of you who are listening who are business owners, you know that it is really a 24/7 job. And so getting this time away is really, really important. And I intend to take advantage of that. So to recap, the important information from today's episode, again, please make it your mantra that if you do not take time to care for yourself, you will not be able to care for others. So I know it's summertime, it's busy, but in honor of International Self-Care Day on July 24th, please do recognize how important self-care is. Take steps to say no or set boundaries so that you can engage in a bit of separation between your work and your home life in order to prevent burnout. And if you are anything like me and you're not brave enough to travel right now for whatever reason, then I urge you to take a self-care staycation and to think about the 8 dimensions of wellness and how you might incorporate some self-care activities that foster each of those different dimensions. And that is it for today's episode. And I hope you found benefit in this. Thank you so much for listening. So that's it for this episode of Reviving Vet Med. I hope that you took away some tips for your self-care this summer, whether you plan to set a boundary, say no, or take that self-care staycation that I was talking about. I would love to hear what you decide to do. Please feel welcome to tag me on social media or email me directly and let me know what your plans are. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate you taking time to subscribe to the podcast, or even better, leave a rating and review. And if you think of someone who is in the veterinary profession and would benefit from this episode, please feel welcome to share it with them. I am sure they would really appreciate it. If you are interested in the resources from today's episode, you can find them on the show notes, or if you want that PDF that I mentioned on setting boundaries and saying no, you can go to mariehollowaychuk.com/simple, and you can find a page where you share your information to receive the download. I'd like to thank my amazing assistant, Jamie, for producing this episode, and I'd also like to thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about today's episode or suggestions for future topics, please do email me. My email address is info@mariehollowaychuk.com. I hope you'll tune in next time, and in the meantime, take care of yourself. Bye now.